so that we would take that up right after public comments between items 5 and 6 out of courtesy to make sure that the mayor is able to come in and inform us as to the subject he'd like to speak on.
I will adjust my, my motion to incorporate that.
Very well. So, is there any objection or discussion?
No, I support it fully. We would need to still vote on the amendment separately, though, I assume? Or could it all just be one?
For something,
Okay, works for me.
something like that, I think that each just knows that that's what we're doing. I think
Perfect.
we should make that.
Because we've done it several different ways, whether we amend it or whether we do it by consensus.
It's not a resolution, it's not an ordinance.
Yeah, so by whatever method. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, so that would mean we are now on the approval of the agenda as adjusted. Any further thoughts or comments? Any other adjustments that anyone would like to contemplate? Seeing none, you'll recognize to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner.
Aye.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson.
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
Commissioner Withington.
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson.
Yes.
Next on our agenda are public comments. Are there any members of the public wishing to comment at this time? Anyone who'd like to comment on any items from the public? Seeing none. That brings us to our first discussion item. That would be the Mayor Pogue from Kearney. And this is Commissioner Lawson's issue, so Commissioner, you'll be the first one to speak once we hear from the mayor. I recognize you first as far as the discussion, because this is your item. Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon, Commission. Thank you for being here. My City Administrator Sheila Earns is going to pass out to the clerk and the Commission some information, some pictures of the interchange that I'd like to speak about today. At the northeast 164th Street and Nation Road, in the area of our Dogwood Elementary School and the Hills of Westwood subdivision, is an extremely dangerous intersection. Part of that intersection is inside our city limits, and part of it is in unincorporated Clay County. So I want to make it clear that we just adopted our our fiscal year budget, which begins this April. We're in the extreme early stages of looking at what's going to be required here to improve this intersection, not only for our city residents, but the unincorporated Clay County residents. This was brought to my attention by an unincorporated Clay County resident, Mr. Mark Thomas, a highly decorated retired state trooper from Missouri, who lives just west of here, who many times himself has almost been in accidents. The pictures will show you, obviously these were taken recently, when it's nicer outside and warmer, and the trees and grass and everything are in bloom and growing. Your ability to safely use this intersection is way worse. As you'd see on the second page, if you're coming north on Nation Road and you're going to be turning west or east on 164th Street, you have to pull, I would say, 15 feet past the stop sign just to be able to even see any of the oncoming traffic. We are currently, as you know, moving forward with our interchange project just south of this location off Nation Road and 144th. And this area, even before the new interchange, is going to continue to become more dense. The west side of our community is where we see the opportunity for the most growth in Kearney. And the new interchange itself will also increase traffic in the same area. Not expecting any commitments from the commission or staff today, but what I would like to offer is for the county to be partners with the city of Kearney on this project, be involved in the problem-solving pieces, and then since it's obviously half of this intersection is in unincorporated Clay County, we would appreciate, once we figure out the solution together, you guys helping us fund the project. So. Other thing I want to mention to the commission is, as we move forward with our interchange project at 144th Street and Nation Road, Just south of there, you guys have a washout issue. We are actively doing construction in the area for one of the two roundabouts on the west side of I-35 on the new interchange. We have received a commitment from our contractor that even during construction, they'll be good neighbors and make sure that your residents south of our project, but north of the washout, will be able to leave their home and get through the area the best they can work together. So that's all I have for the commission today. I appreciate the opportunity. Commissioner Lawson, thank you for attending our Board of Aldermen meeting and giving us the opportunity to have the discussion on this topic today.
Commissioner Lawson, if you'd like to go ahead.
The question I did have, from the other night, we drove down Nation Road and went south where the road is washed out. Have you received any kind of a timeline when that would be fixed?
So I believe the washout issue is a county issue. It's not a city
Yeah.
of Kearney issue.
But did anybody say anything to you about that?
I've not received any.
Okay.
I don't believe I've received any communication on that. My staff may have, but I'm.
Okay,
Have you received an update on that?
I know that they are planning, the county is planning on getting that out in the fall.
okay, good, that's great, great. And I will say one thing, I go back this way on 162nd and Nation, and we have some friends that live back in there, so we'll always go down Nation Road and then left on 162nd. That is a killer corner, and in the summer, when it's in full bloom, you pull way out there, and I've almost got whacked a couple of times because it's a pretty dangerous intersection, so.
I would compare it to maybe a more familiar area. It would be 92 Highway and WHB Road, a very similar safety issue.
Yep, yep. Thank you so much for coming.
Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. Just, well, first of all, hello, Mayor. We haven't had a chance to be introduced, so I'm happy to see you and glad you brought this forward. Clearly, because this is part Kearney and part the county, there would be some hope of working together in the future. My question is, has there been any design work contemplated, or what is the timetable that you may have as far as that design, which will then lead to, here's how much it costs to actually do something here?
Super fair question. So we have not done any traffic studies or any design yet. What I will tell you is our interchange a couple miles south of here is right around $1 million. So my plan is to work with staff and work with county staff in implementing kind of figuring out, what the traffic study requires. And we think a roundabout is the logical solution for the area. And so I would anticipate just a total estimate of cost with inflation and everything, looking at getting a project identified for our next fiscal year budget. So that'll be funding sometime after April 1, 2024. It would anticipate a cost of probably $1.2 to $1.5 million.
Yeah, that would make sense to me. Other question is, outside of your general revenue, is there any other funding source that you have, whether it's impact fees or other fees that, because this is I ask partially because this is a common problem throughout the county, and so trying to have that discussion as to what is our long-term plan for infrastructure is on my mind, but I'm just curious as far as what you're able to do other than general fund. Kind of curious to know what else you've got.
So Kearney does already have a special road district, and besides that, we're always looking at opportunities to, grants, maybe some MARC funding opportunities where we could look at maybe matching dollars or other opportunities there.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Further discussion? Commissioner Withington?
This is actually, I would like to ask Carl or somebody from our highway department, have you guys looked at this intersection, done any traffic counts or anything?
By the way, we do want to make sure that this stays at kind of a, because we're not contemplating action, so if we could keep the questions general, and that falls within that category, but just as a heads up to everybody.
Good afternoon, Commission. Carl Walters, Deputy County Administrator. No, we have not. And since it splits between Kearney and Clay County, we do have traffic counts for our road, but we've not done a traffic study because we're not aware of what's taking place. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Very good. Further discussion? Seeing none. Anything you'd like to add? By the way, we do appreciate you coming to us. We realize this is very early on, but certainly it's good to have a heads up early on these things so that we can be thinking about it as we go forward. And then when we get the proper data from the traffic study and whatnot, we can start drilling down a little bit more and seeing where we can cooperate. But is there anything you'd like to add?
If I could, one closing comment, Commissioner Withington, I would like to mention that Carl's crew does, they're in the area mowing the right-of-way. We've seen them there. A part of this is on, the obstruction is a little bit on private property, but his crews do go out and do maintain their right-of-way there. So we appreciate that.
Commissioner Lawson, do you have anything? No. Commissioner Withington? Sure, go right ahead.
I just want to say thank you to Mayor Pogue. He came to my daughter's fifth grade class with Commissioner Carpenter last week to talk about local government. So thank you, Mayor Pogue, for doing that.
Very good. With that, we will conclude that discussion item, and then we will go back to our regular order, and that brings us to immediate action. Administrator?
Thank you. There are 3 items on the immediate action agenda. The first item is Resolution 2023-69, is approving a professional services contract with Northland Healthcare Access. The second item is Resolution 2023-73, approving acceptance of the award of the 2022 non-playground scrap tire surface material grant. It's a 100% grant that is funded for picnic table replacements. And the third item is Resolution 2023-71, is consideration of approving a term and supply contract with Factory Motor Parts and Jasper Engineers and Transmissions for truck and vehicle parts for the county.
Very good. Are there any questions? Seeing none, is there a motion related to the immediate action agenda?
Yes, I move to approve the items on the immediate action agenda.
Motion has been made for the approval of the 3 items on the immediate action agenda. Further discussion? Seeing none, you are recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner,
Aye.
Commissioner Carpenter,
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Withington,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson.
Yes.
Thank you. That brings us to our regular agenda. First item on our regular agenda is 2023-75.
Resolution 2023-75 is a request for a waiver of fees, interest, penalties, and taxes due to a county error in the amount of $117.60 is being requested by the property owner, Mr. Roger Scheiber. Mr. Scheiber is here, would like to present to the commission, and we also have Assessor Baldwin and Collector that is here and would also be able to answer any questions or provide information to the commission.
Mr. Schreiber, if you'd like to come forward. And I'll say this, I should have probably said it earlier, please make sure the green light is on the microphone, speak directly into it so we can all hear you, and please identify yourself for the audio-only recordings that we're making, so please proceed.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roger Schieber. I live at 4803 North Sycamore Drive, Kansas City, Missouri, and as of this month, I've lived there for 23 years. So proud Clay County member. Before this year, I've never paid my real estate or personal property taxes late. Every year, I've received a yellow legal form in the mail that we filled out for the personal property tax. Last year, we did not. Rather than go into a long sob story of what was happening, started a new job, got COVID, put me out for 2 weeks. That wasn't top of mind. It was, why didn't I get the yellow form? Fast forward a year, I received a delinquent property tax statement. I promptly paid the tax. I promptly paid the 9% penalty. I promptly paid the interest on that amount. However, I am contesting the assessment fee, and then the county put a 9% penalty on the assessment fee and then interest on the assessment fee. So because of the form not being sent to me 22 years in a row that happened. And then my other point is the county, since then, I've done some research, and it looks like the county's gone online. Well, if you don't have internet access or that issue, then how do you fill out the form? So might be a stretch. So that's kind of something I observed as well. That's my spiel, so. Open to questions.
Does anybody have any questions of the applicant? Yes, Commissioner Withington.
Did you ever receive the little postcard with the PIN number and everything to do, so you can go online and fill it out?
I don't remember doing that. And now, again, so if it was sent in the February timeframe, January, February, like I said, I started a new job. When you start a new job, you're usually in this 90-day window where you can't call in sick and you're on eggshells. And then I caught COVID, went to urgent care twice. So, no, I did not remember receiving that. It may have been sent. I just don't remember getting it. And so, I mean, I was looking for a yellow form,
Yes.
to be honest.
Okay, well, that's all I had, because it says they mailed it a couple times or whatever, so, okay, that's the only question
And
I had.
that may be true. It's just, I wasn't like top of mind worried
Yeah,
about.
no, I understand,
Yeah.
I understand.
Yes, Commissioner Johnson.
Sir, a quick question. I've read over your documents here a couple times, but I'm having a tough time understanding what is it exactly, aside from not getting a notice, but what is exactly that you're trying to address here about this penalty that you want returned? I'm not following.
I would like the assessment fee of $105, and then the county put a 9% penalty on that, and I went to your website, and I don't see that that's, I'm not gonna say allowed, but the 9% is on tax, not on a penalty, right, on a fee. And then the county put interest on the 105. So I paid the $870-some on the 23rd of this month. I'm asking that the county waive or ignore the 105 fee and the penalty interest on that amount. That's what I'm here for.
And those calculations, is that something we even control, or is that all state required? Do we know?
I'm going to defer that to both the assessor and the collector.
Tracy Baldwin, Clay County Assessor. Good afternoon, everyone. To answer that question, the interest is accrued by the unpaid balance. Barbara could probably answer that a little better, but I did look into that this morning, and it is on the unpaid balance. Since Mr. Schreiber paid the balance without the $105 penalty, that $105 penalty would be an unpaid balance, and that's the interest gets accrued on.
Okay, so the penalty is considered part of the balance.
Right.
And that's why it's assessed on that.
Yes, Commissioner Lawson.
So let me make sure I understand. The error actually was discovered by our collector, correct? And it is, we did make the error.
No.
No?
No, there is no error. Mr. Schreiber came in February 3rd of 2023 and filed his assessment at that time. That's when the penalty for the previous year would have been added. Mr. Schreiber at that time went to the I believe this is what happened. Mr. Schreiber went to the collector's counter and only paid minus the $105. When the new bill was created, the $105 was the unpaid balance.
Oh, okay.
And that's where the interest and penalties would be generated off the unpaid amount.
Okay, because this says, in the process, the error discovered by the collector is in Mr. Schreiber's benefit. That last statement there.
I would ask that Collector O'Reilly come up and explain
Okay.
that, but you're absolutely correct. When the calculation was done to confirm his concern that it was calculated incorrectly, to some degree that is correct, but it was actually calculated less than what it should have been, so it was really in his favor.
Okay.
But I will defer to Collector O'Reilly.
Okay.
Barbara O'Reilly, Collector. That is correct. The penalty was left on Mr. Schreiber's account at the 7%, which was the prior percentage, and his was not added to the 9% penalties. We're investigating that, and our system analyst is looking into that, what happened for that particular one. And as of yet, we've not heard anything back, but they are going into our system to check to see why his was left at the 7% and not taken to the 9%.
Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you, and I appreciate both the explanations. I think my question is more directed at Mr. Schreiber. So if you haven't already been told, then I'll just mention, as we've had these sorts of cases come before us, it is our guidance that state law says that when the county has made an error, then that is then when we may have the obligation to pay back those various interests and fees. So as I'm learning this and hearing this story, what I'm trying to get to is the county's issue or fault or error in what appears to be the second round of the discussion. It sounds like the first round was somewhat resolved, but because of what was paid at that time, it left this remainder that you're now coming before us to talk about. In your earlier explanation, what I heard was and I can appreciate this, the change in job, you're dealing with that. You've got the COVID issue, you're dealing with that. All of which I understand, and it is very unfortunate. But the guidance suggests where the county is at fault. So help me understand that portion, if you would, please.
I'm not necessarily using the word "at fault."
Yeah, or whatever, however you want to term it.
I guess where I'm going with this is the two issues is the county found out which car I owned, which is a 2019 Camaro, I believe, when they sent me the file. And I guess the change in process and the county relying strictly on the internet to fill out this form, either registering or downloading. Well, if you don't have internet access, you can't do that, where's the form? So I guess I'm not saying at fault, but is there some responsibility that the county, and I'm just asking that question, I'm not claiming that.
Yeah.
The second piece is, so I paid online, by the way. I came in, I filled out, I found out what had to be done as far as this process, filled out the form, brought it in with the paid receipt where I paid online, because yes, I owe personal property tax. Yes, your website says 9% on the tax, penalty on the tax is what your website says. And then interest on the tax, not balance. That's what I remember seeing. I didn't see anything. I looked, that's where it feels like the county's adding on top. I understand the unpaid balance portion, but it feels like the county's adding fees on top of penalties on top of penalties, fees on top of fees, interest, right? So that's where I'm just, I'm asking for, I paid everything, and I'm asking for that to be waived. I'm not saying the county made an error. I'm not saying it's at fault. I'm just saying the circumstances, what they were, 22 years, I'm used to yellow document. And the counter argument might be, well, Roger, ignorance of the rules and law is no excuse. Well, there's a section of I-29 that if that 55-mile-an-hour speed limit sign wasn't there, you'd go 65 because 35 is 65, right? So there is, this again might be a stretch, but there is some responsibility there. So again, I'm not assessing blame or complaining. 90% of I'm here is to discuss this. 10% of it is to experience this. So, to be perfectly honest.
Well, I hope the experience is worth it.
Well, it's local government. I like local government versus big government. So,
well, I appreciate that answer. And if I may ask a question of staff, whoever may want to ask it. Again, using state law as our guidance on this, the issue that's been brought up of kind of the fee over the fee, I guess, can someone help me explain what of that is within our purview and what of that is basically guided by what state law would tell us, to whomever would like to answer that question? Not everyone at once.
So, obviously, without having the statutes right here to go through, my belief is that we are calculating them pursuant to those statutes. But if you're looking for a specific kind of articulation about how we do it and how they're applied, that's probably going to have to come from the assessor or the collector.
Maybe more direct to the question is, would all of that and that process suggest that state law doesn't say you can say yes to this or no to this, or you can do a little bit here but not over here, but rather it's if there's an amount there, you are still doing taxes and fees. I guess I'm getting to, does the state law allow you to parse these things out, or does it say an amount owed is an amount owed, and if there's still an issue there, it's still treated the same way.
Yeah, generally, no, the state law doesn't give us a ton of flexibility on how to interpret or to parse it out. And I say that with the caveat
Yeah.
of needing to go.
Understood.
We need to go through it in real detail, but generally speaking, on this issue, state law does not give us a ton of flexibility.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, Mr. Schreiber, I'm probably going to echo a little bit what my colleague has already said, but actually, first and foremost, I want to say thank you for being a responsible citizen, for paying your taxes as much as you have on time and over the years, and we appreciate that. I don't agree, a lot of us don't agree with a lot of these fees and interest rates and stuff. I think the interest rate's too high. I don't like the fees that we charge. I don't like the way that we do things. The problem is, and the other thing that bothers me even more is we don't get to control any of that, and that's what's frustrating. And like my colleague said, is unless we can show that, hey, somehow the county is at fault, it doesn't mean there's any bad guy or any nefarious thing, but unless we can show, hey, we did something wrong, we made a mistake on this, our hands are kind of tied on this, and there's not a whole lot we can do, as much as I'd love to. Again, I don't like most of this stuff, but I think our hands are kind of tied on this, unless somebody else knows something I don't, but I don't know what else we can do on this.
Commissioner, any other commissioner wish to ask a question or respond? Yeah, the thing is, at one point, and I know this has already been gone over with the commission here, but clearly you were not in the room at the time because this issue was not up there, but it's kind of a step forward that we took some years ago that the state said, if the county says it's their fault, they can return it, because it wasn't, I don't know, about 10 years ago or so, that even if the county admitted fault, we were prohibited from refunding insurance or interest and penalties. While it helps that we now have at least that level of flexibility, but the thing is that I would argue for greater local control from the legislature, but at the moment we do not have that latitude, as some of my fellow commissioners have pointed out. Further discussion? We have a couple of different ways. This is on our regular agenda. Yes, please.
I just wanted to follow up real quickly. Assessor Tracy Baldwin. I wanted to comment real quickly on the mailings that we mail out. Mr. Swiber mentioned that we went online and there's no way for anybody that doesn't have access to do their online assessments. When we presented our online, I believe in 2020, and a lot of it was due to the COVID, there is instructions on there. If you don't have access to online, you could request and we would mail a form out. We still carry that over, and the instructions are on the postcards that we mail out. We do, in this case, Mr. Swiber got a first mailing in January, and this is for any taxpayer every single year. January, we'll send a mailing out to remind people that they need to do their assessments by May 1st. And then we send a second mailing out, usually in March. And then we also, if we have an email on file, we'll also send 2 email notices to remind them as well, so.
Very well. I think commissioners are familiar with the procedure. I would ask that any action to be taken tonight to include in your motion which box to be checked, so that we are able to do that. So, Commissioner Wagner, I believe you want to be recognized.
Yes, and this is no reflection on. Yes, I move to check the box of denial for the request for waiver of fees, interest, penalties, and taxes under 2023-75.
Motion has been made on 2023-75 to vote on it with the box denied, the request for waiver checked. Discussion. Seeing none, you are recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner.
Aye.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson.
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
Commissioner Withington.
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. That concludes 2023-75. Thank you so much for coming in, sir. That brings us to 2023-65, Administrator.
Yes, this is second reading for Resolution 2023-65, approving an agreement between the Office of Administration with the State of Missouri and County of Clay and County of Jackson for fiscal year 2023. There was information presented to the commission last week about renewing this interlocal government agreement for the feasibility study for the Buck O'Neill Bridge. We're happy to answer any questions.
And by the way, this would constitute the second reading. I have that on my agenda. Is that correct, Administrator?
That is correct. Last week it was presented for first reading, and so did not, and to move forward, so it's on tonight for this afternoon for second reading.
Very well. With that, discussion? Commissioner Lawson.
I'll tell you that I did do this. I called, which is a mistake. I called down to the state, and after about 3 days, and I can't even tell you how many phone calls, I finally got to a Senator Washington's office, and she was, her person that answered the phone for couldn't have been a nicer guy. But I went over my concerns and asked him if he could please clarify that, my concern being that if by some chance the people holding the money misappropriated funds, since we signed the document, would we be held liable? I explained to him that the meeting was today, asked him to please call me, let me know one way or the other. I didn't care, I just wanted to be assured how this was going to turn out. Well, I never got a call back. I called this morning again, got to her office immediately, left him a message, nothing. So right now, to me, that's a very gray area. It's not addressed. He couldn't say to me right then, if they misappropriate, you are not responsible. They could not tell me that 100%. So that's all I have to say about it. That's,
By the way, just for whatever historical reference, when we were dealing with the CARES Act funding, it was very explicit in the documentation that should those funds not be expended in the appropriate way, we would be responsible, which led to an extensive discussion, and I think an appropriate discussion, and one which you are kind of following up on. I guess I would ask our counselor, who has looked at that document, did he see anything in there that would that gave an indication about liability in one way or the other, or what his feel for it is?
Well, there is, certainly language that says,
Could you a little louder?
There is language certainly in the document that says if there's misappropriation of the funds, there is liability and responsibility. And certainly that is the case in every contract or whether it's written in the contract or implied, that's the way it is in almost every contract we do. In this one in particular, the contract is written so that we can cooperatively work with another county, in this case Jackson, and that all the money actually will run through that recipient, and that's the term used in the contract is recipient, and that a recipient is liable for misappropriation. Certainly and I believe that's what we will do in this contract, and my position would be that if Jackson County receives the money and misappropriates it, they are the recipient, and we will take that position, strongly, that we are not liable for anything that they would do. And of course, the big picture is this type of language is not uncommon, and generally speaking should be in there, and generally speaking is not really ever a problem.
Well, and I guess the point that I would make is that in the case of the CARES Act funding, which was of course federal money, a slightly different thing is it was spelled out pretty explicitly that that is to say Clay County, in those circumstances, if it was misspent by a recipient, we had liability. It sounds like that is not necessarily the case in this particular document.
That is the reading I would take. I agree with you. That's the reading I would take.
Commissioner Johnson, I think you wanted to. Okay, Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. Just to mention, because until yesterday I was on the Parks Board, and this came up a couple of times, for Kansas City rather. The only way this doesn't, or the only way there is risk is if a study isn't performed. And as it was the advocates many of those in the bicycle and pedestrian community who wanted an examination of the old bridge to see if it could be used in much the same way as the High Line in New York City, for example, prompted Senator Greg Razor to bring this forward, which he did. I tend to think the only way something is misappropriated is if there is no study performed, which would then be a pretty obvious one. At that point, there's a lot of answering that a lot of folks would have to make. But my sense of it is there's a strong enough push for those bicycle and pedestrian advocates that a study is going to be done. Now, whether or not that study actually produces something that is actionable, well, that's a whole other matter. But I think for purpose of doing what was intended, it would certainly do that. So to the extent that that is helpful, I'll offer that.
Commissioner
Just
Lawson.
one, then I have one question for you. So,
I'm sorry, for me or for,
oh, I'm sorry, no.
okay, inquire of
For your
Commissioner
esteemed
Wagner.
colleague
Gotcha.
here. So the question is this: if that is something that sounds like people are interested in it, why is it taken in a year? They haven't done anything with it. Do you know?
Well, I would never cast aspersions on any other governmental body in this region, and so I will not. Only just to say that that has been noticed, I believe, and thus the action to rectify that is why this is here now.
Any further discussion or comment? Very well. With that, as we are on second reading, is there any other comment from staff?
Thank you. We're having a little sidebar.
Sure.
Director Jones was and is the county's representative as part of this process. And so I'd certainly defer to him, but I know he was part of that evaluation process. They have selected a firm to do the study, and we don't have a copy of the contract, but we are under the impression that that study is currently being done.
And I guess I'd like to add, at the time this contract was originally contemplated, because it did lapse, the interest of the city of Kansas City to go forward with was pretty palpable. There was not very much question that they indeed wanted to go forward on this. So I have a pretty high level of confidence based on those conversations. I actually ran into Council Member Bunch, who I'm sure would have a thing or two to say if this did not happen.
He would be one of the biggest advocates that pushed for this to begin with, so I would tend to agree.
Commissioner Lawson, do you have any else? Anyone else have any other comments? Very well. Is there a motion related to 2023-65?
Yes, I move that we approve 2023-65.
Motion has been made for the approval of 2023-65. Discussion? Seeing none, you are recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner,
Aye.
Commissioner Carpenter,
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Withington,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson.
Yes.
That brings us to 2023-72. Administrator?
Resolution 2023-72 is approval of the semi-annual payment for the 2023 to Synergy Services from the Domestic Violence Fund, and Auditor Herbert is here to explain the process to the commission.
Please proceed.
Yes, Victor Hurlbert, Clay County Auditor. So Resolution 2023-72 is approving semi-annual payments of Synergy Services. Commissioners, what this is for our new members, just to explain a little bit, essentially we have a reserved domestic violence fund. And it's funded by statute, some fees that are on marriage licenses as well as court activity. And essentially, we are to make semi-annual payments to a domestic violence shelter. The way that entity is chosen is they make application to your domestic violence board appointed by the commission, and that board meets annually and makes a selection. So for this year, the only applicant and the recommendation from the board is Synergy Services, and the semi-annual payment for the balance at the end of 2022 is $14,082.70. Other information that you can see that this an organization has to qualify for is really in their application, and the application was built to demonstrate that compliance with statute. For instance, they have to basically document that they're, a nonprofit, show their budget to you, show their board members. They also, by statute, really have to document that they don't get, that they get at least 25% of their funds from other sources. Well, as you can see in their application, they actually get 99% of their funding from other sources. This only makes up about 1% of their budget. Also that they have, confidentiality agreements in place, things of that nature. So essentially, that's a little explanation for you for what this is. We do this on an annual basis. So once you make approval of the Domestic Violence Board's recommendation to you at June 30th, we'll take the balance at that time, usually about the same amount, and make a payment to Synergy Services as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
By the way, I picked up from your remarks, and it seemed pretty obvious, but this is something that happens annually. This is not an unusual circumstance.
That's correct.
Questions of the auditor? Commissioner Withington. Too many W's up here, it's confusing.
You said Synergy was the only one to apply. Do we know why no one else applied, or?
I don't know if there's another entity that's, would be eligible in the county, but that's been the way for decades, and, per the Domestic Violence Board.
So does Synergy usually just get this, is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. They're the only entity that appears to be appropriate and to apply, the law applies to, and for years.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure.
They're the only game in town, is the way I would say it.
Commissioner Wagner.
Just make sure I caught what you said just a moment ago, as far as whenever we approve, the actual check gets written in June. Did I hear that right? Or?
So as soon as you approve this resolution, the county will submit payment for the balance at the end of '22, and then after June 30th, we'll just make another
Then
payment.
we'll go back around again after
That's
June.
correct.
Very good. Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson.
Mine is just a question about our Clay County application for domestic violence shelter funds. Question 3, it asked to list the trustees' race and socioeconomic makeup. Why do we ask that?
So that's actually, a good question. The application was built really to reflect the statutes, and there is a statute that talks about on 455.220. It talks about, the organization should have trustees who represent the racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic diversity of the community to be served, at least one of whom must possess personal experience in confronting or mitigating the problems of domestic violence. So I think that's the reason why that question got in there.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or comments? We can, this is kind of a transfer of funds, is it not, rather than expenditure of county? How would you classify this, Administrator?
Certainly, it goes through our payment process, and so it is an expenditure of funds, but I think certainly if it's the Commission's pleasure to approve this evening, then what that does is allow us to expedite the funds going to Synergy.
Okay, and that would mainly, the purpose of that, there's no emergency constituted, there's been no request by Synergy.
Certainly, Synergy is aware of this and has made sort of an application to us for their funding, but unless they've contacted the auditor and said that there is a emergency need, I'm not aware of one.
I'll say, I think they're always, interested to get all the money so they can continue to do their good work. I think as far as I filled out this RCA, we actually, staff, updated that RCA to, I specified a work in a business, but I think we're fine if this passes, today.
And also, and the other point of that is, I think you indicated that this is a pretty small slice of their budget.
Correct, 1% or less, yeah.
Commissioner Wagner.
And working for a nonprofit by day, I understand the desire to get money in as soon as one possibly can, so that I do get that. My question is, so the recommendation that has come to us, though, was also looked at by another public body, that being the I'm sorry, now it's, I'm sorry?
The domestic violence
Ye-
board.
Yes, thank you.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm zoning out. So so this has already had one public group that has taken a look at this and made this recommendation before it came to us.
That's correct.
Right, okay.
Okay. Further discussion? Commissioner Withington? Okay. Okay, I'll go ahead and make that, and then we will open up if there's any further discussion. Motion has been made for the approval of 2023-72. Is there a, no, there is no box that is required to be, I always have to check that. There's no box required to be checked, so motion has been made for the approval of 2023-72. Further discussion? Okay. With that, please call the roll. I'm sorry, you are recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Withington,
Yes.
Commissioner Wagner,
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson.
Yes.
Very well. That brings us to our next issue, and that is 2023-77. Administrator?
Resolution 2023-77 is approving the renewal of property and casualty insurance with Travelers Insurance, and Christine Poles, our risk manager, is here to provide information to the commission.
Please proceed.
Hello, Commissioners. Christine Pulse, Risk Manager for Clay County. Today, the RCA before you is for the renewal of the Travelers Property and Casualty Insurance Policy. As we presented to you last week, the county's insurance broker, CBIZ, they've been conducting our annual renewal for property and casualty insurance. We do have the total amount that came in on that, and it is good news. It is a slight reduction from what it was last year by $19,000 and change. Even better news, when we put together the 2023 budget, we did so assuming that our insurance would go up. So we do have plenty of funds available to make the payment on the policy. And staff is recommending that we utilize the budgeted premium savings to build a reserve to fund future deductible costs associated with what we talked to you about last week with the change in the wind and hail damage, should there be any claims to properties within the county. To go into further detail on the renewal, I am asking Tom from CBIZ, who was here to talk to you last week, to take you through a little bit more detail.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tom McGuire with CBIZ. Going to hit some of the high notes of the renewal here. And a lot of it that we hit last week kind of came to fruition with the wind and hail deductible that Christine was talking about. One of the things that we did do this year that we don't believe had been done for some time at the county was carriers are getting very specific on what they call insurance to value, making sure buildings are insured to the proper value. We did get a third-party on-site property appraisal done this year. That actually increased our, as you can see, our what they call TIV, total insured value on that property line, by over 28%. So most of that being at the detention facility. The odd kind of thing about that is as we get insurance to value correct and agreed upon by the insurance carriers, we do typically see a rate reduction in what is charged for each $1,000 of building, and that happened again here with Clay County. Our buildings were down about 10% from a rate standpoint, and our contents was down almost right around 28%. So we did get a rate reduction, even though our values that we're insuring is higher, which you can see, even though we're insuring 28, almost 29% more value, we were only up about 8%, a little over 8% in the total premium. So believe it or not, the carriers want to make sure that if there's something happened, that they have the funds to be able to rebuild the buildings. We saw a slight, we just did see an increase on the budget expenditures that caused an increase on the general liability premium. Some of that also is just a little bit of claims activity on the general liability that was causing a little bit of rate increase there. That was offset some by our improving loss experience on the law enforcement and employment practices, which, as we can see, we saw a pretty significant rate decrease there. Management liability is again tied to almost specifically to the budget, and so we saw an increase there. A slight increase on the workers' compensation line of coverage, which was due to some payroll increases, and then an increase in our experience mod, which is a factor used by the insurance industry to kind of compare us to counties across the United States. And so we did see a slight increase in the mod, which resulted in an increase on the workers' compensation premium. We did get a competitive bid on the workers' comp. As we talked last week, the property and casualty side is a little bit more difficult to find willing participants on the carrier side. Not so much on the comp. We got a slightly lower bid on the work comp, but if you remove the work comp from Travelers, then you lose some credits on the other lines of coverage, and it became, a more fiscal responsibility to just keep the whole thing with Travelers. So with that being said, I'm open to obviously answer any questions that you may have regarding this renewal.
And I believe we heard this, Administrator, last week under discussion items.
Yes, that's correct. Last week, under discussion, we brought forward to you a little bit of information about what we were seeing with the public sector when it came to insurance and property and casualty, and also wanted to make sure and talk specifically about, the wind and hail damage and how that has changed in this policy, where there's not a the deductible is based a percentage of the buildings, which is why, as our risk manager said, we have about $66,000 budgeted, that the actual premium is going to be below the budgeted amount. So we were recommending that we set aside those funds and start building up the reserves, so that if we should encounter a situation that we had a substantial deductible to repair a roof from one of our buildings, that we're starting to build up reserves for that.
No, I think that is certainly a good pursuit to undertake. The other part I was trying to get to was that this constitutes a first reading, just for information.
I'm sorry. Yes.
No, that's okay. No, I think what you said was very important. We need to hear that once again, because we made some allusion to it, and I want to make sure it was resurfaced. But yes.
That is correct. While it was on last week for discussion, it was more informational. We did not present to you the final premiums. And so the final premium for all our property and casualty insurance is $2.2 million. So we put this on only for first reading, where our policies do not expire until March sometime. So
March 15th.
So waiting until next week to do the final and second reading is certainly feasible, and we won't have a gap in coverage.
And while there's obviously there's a cost savings here, 2.2 plus is a significant amount of an expenditure for the county. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you, and I appreciate the comments on the last as far as dates and how they all run together. My question, as I'm looking over the actual ordinance, though, is really pertaining to the use of the savings, and I would tend to agree that the savings that we would have should be put in the direction that's suggested, but I'm not exactly seeing that direction in what we have here, which, if that is the case, I would like to codify that in some manner. So if I'm missing something, tell me, because I just want to make sure that that is addressed in some way.
If you're correct, the resolution simply just authorizes the premiums of $2.2 million. Since this is on for first reading, if that is the desire of the commission, we can modify this resolution to clarify that the budgeted savings would then be allocated to start building up that reserve. Mm-hmm. So we can modify the resolution before next week.
Well, I appreciate that comment, and I would make such a suggestion to the body, to the legislative body, just to make sure that if that is our intent and that is the staff's intent, that it says so, just so that there's no surprises down the road, or that somehow we decide, we need to actually have an action that says the thing that we agreed to do this time. So I'll just throw that out as just a a friendly suggestion that, that if we were to hold to next week, that be codified in some way. So,
I think that's a good suggestion and certainly worthy of discussion. Commissioner Johnson.
So my question is actually out of complete ignorance, and I'm not sure who answers this, but it's really to help me better understand, and maybe some people at home that are almost as ignorant as me. So when it comes to buying insurance for a county, I've never done that before, but I bought insurance, you know, for my home and my cars, and I shop around. I shop different insurance agencies, and I actually have an agent who does some shopping for me, and every year I kind of shop around where I can get the best deal. Explain to me, what kind of shopping around have we done? And how many other shops are out there that insure a county? How do we know we're getting the best deal? I mean, 2.2 million.
That's a great question. As we discussed a little bit last week, the insurance marketplace is extremely tight right now as it relates to what we consider public entities, anything that's funded with taxes. So the amount of carriers that are out there that are even willing to insure a county are less now than they even were 12 months ago. So with that being said, due to the relationship that we at the county has had with Travelers dating back many years, staff and CBIZ decided that it was best to negotiate this renewal, which was the first one we worked on just with Travelers as far as the property and liability goes. As far as what other options there are out there from a carrier standpoint, we're really about to the point in for Clay County that the options are Travelers, who we're with for the bulk of this, like take the work comp out that we kind of did get a competitive bid on. And then outside of that, we're looking at pooling arrangements. So there's several pools in the state of Missouri that pool entities together and kind of share risk, for lack of a better term. From the CBIZ standpoint, we are agnostic in terms of whether you're in a pool or with Travelers, or if there would be somebody that enters the market at another point that we went there. We are highly confident that for Clay County particularly, that Travelers is going to be the most cost-effective at this particular time. We work with about 65 to 70 local municipalities of some sort in the Kansas City region, so we do a lot of the we do a lot of this in terms of finding insurance for entities like yourselves, and we are confident from a premium standpoint that Travelers is the most cost-effective for Clay County at this particular time.
How many other carriers are there that could do Clay County?
So what we would consider first dollar carriers, meaning ones that would look just like what Travelers is offering right now, very limited. We may be able to, due to just the sheer size of what we're insuring from just a building standpoint, we really are limited. Travelers is about the only first dollar option that's a legitimate option for you at this point. We have pinged some markets, meaning we've talked to them but not officially submitted for other entities that are your size, and those other markets that do the first dollar are shy away from just this size of total insured value. From a pooling standpoint, there's a handful of pools that are out there, of which, you know, in our opinion, maybe a couple would be pertinent to bring to you in terms of being able to handle a risk of this size. Due to the number of entities that we insure, we are confident that they would be more expensive.
What are other counties and cities using if they're not using Travelers?
So Buchanan County, which is another insured of ours, they're with Travelers as well. We have a few smaller counties that do utilize some of the pools that we talked about. They would be smaller, more rural area counties that might be with a Midwest Public Risk or a MOPERM pool. But in the ones that we would consider peers of yours, typically it's Travelers. Now, The other option is if, you're looking at taking on, is a big change. If you're looking at more of the self-insured, where we're going up and taking on $250,000 of liability deductible for law enforcement and for our general liability and those type of things, then that opens up a little bit more, so a few more options, but it's a total philosophical change in terms of how.
So that's just change the self-insured. So that's another conversation, but my real issue is, hey, okay, we're looking at travelers, but what else have we looked at? And have we compared anything else? Have we shopped around with other carriers, and are there other carriers to shop around?
Yes, just due to the limited amount of carriers or lack of carriers that would even respond to a Clay County, which I know is not what you're wanting to hear at this point, but that is really where we're at in terms of the marketplace.
So we haven't checked with anybody else
No.
but travelers, is what you're saying?
No. Like we said last week, 12 months ago, we would have been able to bring Travelers, One Beacon, Brit, would have all looked very similar to Travelers. One Beacon and Brit merged and then decided to move out of the municipality market in the last 12 months or so. So where 12, 18 months ago, we would have had 3 legitimate options for you, now we're dwindling down to just Travelers, who I will say has been tried and true in the municipality market for years. They don't jump in and out, so they are a mainstay. And it's frustrating from our end too, to not be able to go out and.
Yeah, it sounds more like a monopoly than a mainstay. It sounds like there's.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the fact that they have not jumped in and out of the market as other markets have, and have stayed true to at least insuring municipalities and providing options for them.
Yeah, I just really wish I had some other. I don't know if 2.2 million is a great deal or if it's a horrible deal. I don't know. I don't know what to compare it to.
When we benchmark your rates against what our other entities would be, we're falling right in where, everybody else is now. Whether that, in theory, is a great deal, when you don't have many options is.
Let us see before next week if we can provide some benchmark comparisons for you. I do think there are, in the future, I do believe there will be some additional options for various lines of coverage available to the county. He mentioned, a pool with other governmental agencies in Missouri. So very familiar with that. In fact, the county at one point in time was a member of one of the pools for various lines of coverage. Unfortunately, due to the magnitude of our claims, we were asked to leave, right? Insurance will cancel people sometimes, or agencies. And so I do think as the county continues to progress in operations and exposure and, claims, that we will have other opportunities to pursue. But I think we can try and look at some benchmarks for you to give you a comfort level that, while this is right now only one quote, that it is a reasonable quote.
Yes, I remember that circumstance, and it certainly does fulfill the adage about living in interesting times when you lose your insurance. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. I'll ask the question, kind of coming at it from a different direction than my colleague, but probably ending up in the same place. I'll acknowledge that you don't have a whole lot of carriers, and therefore you can't get the Patrick price for those of you who follow such insurance carriers. I thought that was funnier than what I got, but okay. But the question really comes down to, I think, one of how solicitation is done to find carriers, and then what is the scope that we are asking for to be fulfilled, which may get back to the question or the comments from the administrators. So whether that is done now or maybe as part of what may be produced for next week, just kind of talking about how that solicitation process occurs to find the travelers and to find the other ones, I think would be helpful, as well as what we're asking from them, which then may then dwindle it down to a single. Or if you want to make some comments on those questions, I'm certainly fine as well.
Yeah, from our standpoint, just kind of generally speaking, and we did talk to staff about this as well. I mean, we have started what you would consider preliminary conversations with some pools, and just in terms of getting a comfort level for the county. We were confident that they would be more than what Travelers was, and maybe they didn't have the comfort level for this particular year to be able to provide an option. You know, just because of the amount of municipalities we do, we were pretty dialed in on Travelers, just because we know the marketplace very well. It has been unfortunate for us as well to not be able to bring multiple options and leverage, you know, different carriers off of one another. But just due to the fact that it's all my team does is work on municipalities, that we do know the marketplace very, very well.
I guess, but then to scope, not everybody's Clay County, just like not everybody is New York, or not everybody's St. Joseph and all that. So just trying to answer that question is this is a good deal or not. There's, I guess, something to be said of what is it we're asking for, and depending on a carrier's bandwidth to be able to deal with that, you know, does that lead to then, well, if you want this and this and this and this, there's only one guy that does it, and that's Travelers, and so here you go.
Okay, understand what you're asking now.
Yeah.
So if I can just, I'll use an example, and I'll use an example that we did here. There is a carrier, it's part of a larger umbrella carrier called Tokyo Marine Insurance. And they're not new to the public entity space, but newer to this region, right? And so we did have a conversation with them. And I might get this a little bit wrong, but they are, their underwriting guidelines state, you know, nothing within 70 miles of a metro area, right? Nothing over $100 million of total insured building value. And so as you're starting to have those conversations, just due to size and geography, you start narrowing in on what the actual options are, if that addresses.
No, those are great examples,
Yeah.
and then that helps illustrate it for me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to start rounding off the discussion. My recommendation would be, and I'd like to see some discussion on that, and that is that we, by consensus, move this item to our regular agenda for next week, with the proviso that there be a provision added, as Commissioner Wagner had recommended, for the savings to be put into a contingency account, for lack of a better way to put it. And then we can, at our next meeting, take that up on our regular agenda and fully discuss that. If that is the will of the commission to do that, I'd like to get a little feedback, make sure everybody feels that this is the proper course forward. So I'd be willing to recognize anyone who would like to speak on that point. Commissioner Johnson.
You know, I think it's a good idea. The only concern I have is I like the idea of putting the money saved into some kind of account. I don't know if I like the idea of tying strings to it where they can only be used for this, and I guess handcuffing staff on, or anybody on where that money can be spent. So I guess it depends on how that's worded, but yeah, I do agree that money should be socked away for.
I think that, and again, I'm just speaking off the top of my head here, I would myself prefer that it be put in such a way that it would be only expended for other uses with the explicit approval of the commission. Does that make sense? Commissioner Wagner?
I'm for that.
Any further comments from any of the other commissioners? If that is the consensus of the commission, does staff need any further instruction to go forward with what the feel of the commission is, with the will of the commission?
No, I think we have enough information. This will be on your regular agenda next week with some changes to the resolution and some additional information for you.
That would be great. Very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to 2023-70. I've got too many little arrows pointing around. I'm sorry.
Resolution
2023-70.
2023-70 is consideration of approving a 5-year mail machine lease agreement with Pitney Bowes, and Deputy County Administrator Coons is here to provide information.
Please proceed.
Good afternoon. Donna Kuntz, Deputy County Administrator. Commissioners, we have a small mail machine, and our lease is going to be expiring in April. And like everything else, it has computer chips, and we have a option for a new and improved model that will actually save us money. And as benign as a mail machine sounds, last year we processed almost 77,000 pieces of mail with our mail machine. And Kip Jones certified mails for planning and zoning cases just keeps us hopping down there. So we've worn out the machine, and we would like to upgrade to a new 5-year lease, and again, staying with Pitney Bowes. And part of the reason that there's an added bonus for us with the Pitney Bowes is they also provide a mail courier that comes up, and after we process all of our mail, hand picks up all of our letter trays and takes it straight to the pre-sort center. So we don't have to risk taking it to a mailbox, getting it out in the wind, going down to the local post office. The total cost for this would be $6,071.28, and this is actually a reduction from what we've been paying.
Thank you. Is my understanding that, while this is on first read, that there would be a cost savings realized by acting on it with more expedience? Am I correct on that? Or is
The new contract will reduce the cost that we are currently paying monthly. So when we're due to expire here at the end of the month, so in April, we're ready for a new lease agreement.
okay. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. And Donna, you're tricky this week because I noticed no boxes checked if immediate action is required. So tricky. So I'll ask my question this way. If
Paying attention, darn.
Well, you know, I try. Anyway, but if we were to take action today, does that accelerate the expiration of the current contract, or no matter what you do, the contract is the contract, and those realized savings will not happen until April, no matter what?
That is correct. They will not start until we sign the new agreement in April, because this one will not expire until March 31st.
They
So-
don't want to give us savings faster.
No, I'm sorry, we've done our best, we really have. but
Well, you tried. So.
I tried.
Thank you for clarifying, because I was not quite clear.
I think I knew where you were going. So.
Yeah, that was where I was trying to go with that, to see if there was that. Further discussion, any other questions? Very well, seeing none, is there we can either take a motion on acting on this evening, or we can put it on for either regular or consent at our next meeting. Is there any motion or any recommendations?
I move to place 2023-70 on next week's consent agenda.
Very well. Motion has been made to put 2023-70 on consent agenda for next week. Discussion? Seeing none, that is a consensus motion, so that will appear on our consent agenda for our next meeting. That brings us to our final issue, which is 2023-76. Administrator?
Resolution 2023-76 is approving and signing the formal proposal and capital project encumbrance request for the purchase of 3 replacement dump trucks with Nextran Truck Center for our Highway Department. And Highway Administrator Griffin is here to provide information.
Good afternoon. Terry Griffin, Highway Administrator. This is, as the Administrator said, a request to approve the purchase of 3 replacement dump trucks. We'll be buying 3 new Mack trucks on a 5-year lease-to-own purchase plan through Kansas State Bank. There is a sample agreement that's included in the packet that you have. We'll be trading in 3 2015 model international trucks that have continuous problems and are costing more and more to maintain and to keep running for the Highway Department. And so what we're asking today is that you approve the purchase, and then whenever the trucks are actually built and ready to be delivered, we'll come back to you again to sign the actual lease agreement at that time.
Are there any questions? Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. Well, Terry, you are equally tricky, I notice, and did not mark whether immediate action is required. Based on what you've mentioned, though, things still have to get built.
Yes.
But I also recognize if you communicate that a week faster, maybe that makes a material change. So if you want to speak to that.
We have to place the order before March 15th in order to be on the summer production schedule. Summer production schedule means that the trucks will be delivered sometime toward the end of this year or the first of next year. So it's imperative that we have a decision before March 15th.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Further questions? Commissioner Johnson.
Quick question, how old are the 3 trucks that we're replacing? What kind of mileage they have on them?
They are all 2015 models. They are internationals with what's called a MaxForce engine, which has been the source of a lawsuit in the past because of the problems that are inherent in that engine. They're costing us more and more. Right now, all the trucks have less than 100,000 miles on them, but they are not functioning well. They're falling apart.
Okay. Further questions or comments? Seeing none. Is this something we would like to put on next week's regular agenda?
My
Commissioner
suggestion,
Wagner.
thank you. My suggestion was going to be consent. I think the issue is needed, but since we have until the 15th, that was going to be my suggestion if others agree.
I could go either way, I just want to get a consensus. So, I'm sorry, you said which? Consent. Is everybody good with consent agenda for this item?
Well, traditionally, this is a $600,000 expenditure. Traditionally, we've not done that kind of expenditure on consent. That being said, I know there's been conversation around changing the way we do things. We haven't actually done that yet. So in the meantime, I would feel more comfortable putting the $600,000 items on the old regular agenda.
Very good. So, any further comment on that? Very well, so that is number, 2023-76 will be on next week's regular agenda.
Real quick,
Yes, sir.
what was the timeline you had to get the order in by?
We have to place the order before March 15th.
Okay, what are we at right now? Today's the 1st.
So we
Next
would
week
be
would be the
acting
8th. Yeah, next week
on
would
the
be the
8th. Okay, very good. With that, is there a motion related to the regular agenda items that we have heard today?
Yes, I'd like to make that motion. I move to place 2023-70 to the consent agenda and 2023-77 and 2023-76 on the regular agenda for next week.
Motion has been made to put items on the regular and consent agenda as just outlined. Any discussion? Seeing none, you are recognized to close.
I close.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Wagner.
Aye.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson.
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
Commissioner Withington.
Yes.
Commissioner Lawson.
Yes.
That concludes our regular agenda. That brings us to discussion items. Our first discussion item has already been dealt with. That brings us to the second item on our discussion item. Administrator, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce that, and I'll go to Commissioner Johnson to open the discussion.
Yes, this item is put on as a request for a discussion by Commissioner Johnson with regard to the placement of the invocation back on the agenda for the commission.
Very good. Commissioner Johnson.
So I guess I first want to seek to understand before trying to be understood. And so the county commission has always had invocation at the beginning of the meetings, and it stopped sometime at the end of last year, but I'm not quite sure when. I noticed that the ordinance was actually changed. It used to be part of the ordinance and part of the schedule of our meetings that there's a pledge of allegiance and invocation. In the ordinance, it required, I think, the city administrator or the county administrator to give that invocation, which I don't think is necessarily appropriate. But nonetheless, the invocation was taken out. And I'm trying to find out maybe some understanding of when, why, how, what's the purpose, why we got rid of the invocation.
Historically, it's not really necessarily been one or the other. We have had it, and in earlier times we have not had the invocation. It's kind of gone back and forth a little bit. So it's never really been absolute in my experience here. I think it's a good thing to have it. I think it is one of those things that when it becomes one person's responsibility, it gets to be, when you say the prayer every week, or the invocation, it gets a little bit hard to come up with something fresh, let's say. So I think that, I think I would like to see some resolution to go forward on this, on who that person would be, whether we, I suppose we could create the office of sort of an honorary office, that is, of chaplain to the commission. That would be one possibility. I think by and large, it is, it's a good thing. Not by and large, I think it is a good thing. Just for what it's worth, when I've been chairman of other bodies, one of the ways that we dealt with that was and again, it was just my own personal preference, that happily the body I was presiding over at that time agreed, and that was that we put as far as placement goes, that we would put the invocation ahead of the pledge. For me, and it's just a suggestion, it's the issue of God and country, not country and God. But that's just my own personal spin on it. But I think we need to, I think not just having the invocation, but I think having some guidelines on how that invocation is put together. And I think also there is due caution to recognize the world we live in, and to try our best to, while doing that respectful part of our agenda, not to put ourselves in a position where we would be looking to get any illegal entanglements, anybody who would be, not opposed to the prayer so much, but so that we made sure that any invocations did not trigger some other kind of response that we would not be looking for.
So my question is, that was actually codified in our county ordinance, and it was taken out sometime right before we took office. I'm trying to figure out when that happened, when and why that happened.
I think that was it. It was, as you say, it was the administrator who was doing that.
Oh.
And part of the issue was that it was becoming difficult to come up with something that was, I don't want to say original so much, but that it became more and more of a study to do that. And in my mind, we might be more well served by having someone who has the religious background to be able to express that more, who has to where it's their area of expertise. That's why I say perhaps we should be looking at some kind of a informal chaplain position or something like that. I don't know, but I think we want to make sure that it is done respectfully, and I think we want to make sure that it doesn't become something that is overly labored over behind the scenes. We need to make sure that it's something that we're not taking a lot of time to do that we could be using for administrative purposes, and that's why I make the observation that perhaps that would be a way to go.
Well, that's absolutely something that I would like to see. I'm open to whatever the rest of the commission likes, but I won't go into all the details why I think that's important, but I'll just state for the record, I think that's important. And I'd like to see that come back in maybe more of a form that you're talking about, but those are my thoughts.
Any other thoughts? Oh, sorry about that, guys. Commissioner Lawson.
Yeah, I don't even think there's a question in my mind that that's something that we should do. If, they do it in Congress, they do it down at the state, right? And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't do the same. I think, it's not something we're going to stand up here and preach for an hour, but I'd certainly be willing to offer a prayer before we start. I think Jay would. I think, the majority of people, you could just say before it starts, who wants to give the invocation today? And somebody gives a short invocation, thanking God for all our blessings and going on. I don't think it should be a big deal. I don't understand why it ever was stopped. That is not, I wouldn't say it's upsetting to me, but it's disappointing that it was stopped. So I think it's something that we should really look at. If we need to have a vote, we have a vote or whatever, but I think it needs to be put back in the process.
Well, and the bodies that you mentioned do in fact have a chaplain. But the thing is, if we are spreading it around and making it a rotating thing, it doesn't become something of, oh my gosh, what do I say appropriate this time? So it allows people to be a little bit more open with their time. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you, and I'll just throw a little of experience out there. with the last governmental body I was a part of, and neither to say yes or no or anything, but just to throw that out there. So at the City of Kansas City, they program that, if you will, and get those individuals who may have an interest in providing that invocation. So, that's the line of work that they're in, per se. And the clerk's office makes that schedule. They usually have a rotation. You may see the same, you may see a person maybe every 8 weeks, every 10 weeks, depending on who they have within that bank, so to speak. In the case of the Kansas City Police Department, they have about 8 chaplains that they have, and they come in at every one of their meetings, and they do that. So I guess my point being that that is not necessarily the job of anyone as part of the legislative body, but there is that assignment given in the case of Kansas City to the clerk's office to program that. And then that individual will come, do their 3 minutes, and off they go. Not a lot of time to pontificate about politics, but get the job done that they are there to do. But I just offer that to say that, that is a way to do it. Not necessarily the way that it has to be done, but the last thing I'll mention is I too read in the old rules that it was part of the county administrator's job, and I kind of feel like there's no offense, but there may be others more qualified to do invocations. But you're pretty good. I know, but you got a lot to do already, and so anyway. Just to throw that out there of creating that mechanism, and it can be codified in that way. So I'll leave it at that.
No, I think it's good to have a couple of options put on the table. Commissioner Carpenter.
Well, thank you. I only have the briefest of remarks, but I noted that maybe County Council wanted to jump in. If he does, I'd love to hear from you, but if you'd prefer not to, but before I make remarks. So if Mr. President, I would love to.
Oh, we'd love to hear him first.
If that's all right with you.
That's certainly fine. Mr. Counselor, if you'd care to share some thoughts with us now.
Sure, I can offer just a couple thoughts. One is more factual. I believe sometime around 2016, maybe 2017, the ordinances were changed to start the invocation, and that's when it started. I can tell you that prior to that, at least roughly for the 25 years or so prior to that, there was never an invocation at the county. But around 2016, 2017, I think that was the right time frame, is when it was started. So that's just a factual observation, but probably the bigger observation from my seat is the reason you want to be thoughtful about this one is the First Amendment requires that we not engage in the establishment of religion as a governmental body. This is a very contentious, litigated issue throughout the country, has been very contentious up to and including the United States Supreme Court. Where we get into some trouble is when it is very singular in the type of prayer that's given and the type of religion that is focused on, and where it's less problematic is where it is, different perspectives are offered when it comes to an invocation. So I'll just throw that out there. In the past, we have received nasty letters from the ACLU about these types of things, and it is not a fully settled issue on depending on what is said.
That was kind of what I was referring to. I didn't want to necessarily say litigation, but yes, that there are those considerations to be taken into account. Commissioner Carpenter. Commissioner Carpenter.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I think we have a diversity of sort of opinions and ideological views on things. This is inconsequential enough to me that I'm perfectly fine if we want to bring it back. But since we're taking the moment to sort of go on the record with our views, it's my view that government ought not engage in the infusion of religion into our affairs. I think we would be better served not to do it. That being said, I don't think it's that big a deal, is my view. So if the body wants to bring back the invocation, I think that can be just fine. To the councilor's point, I think probably we ought to be safe about being pretty general in the terminology used. But yeah, that's my view. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. Again, not to take a side either way, but just to point out in what I was used to in the Kansas City experience and kind of getting to that point, that's why there was a bank of people who would come, and there were a rotation, and that rotation was reflective of different denominations as well as different religions. And so if it is something that we wish to pursue, I would suggest casting the net out wide in order to hopefully defer some of those particular issues that the county councilor points out. And again, as it seemed to reside before in the ordinance that speaks to how we do business, it makes some sense to me that's folded into that discussion. But at any rate, those points are well taken, and I just offer some options based on some experience. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
I think it would be prudent for the commission to have some expression of guidelines. Clearly, a prayer that was overtly denominational to one particular area, one particular religion would be concerning. So I think if we go forward on this, we might want to put together some guidelines just to make sure that we are kind of staying within the area here. I think it's certainly possible to go down this road without incurring liability and still express the thoughts that are I think wanting to be expressed. Commissioner Lawson.
Just a quick question. How did you do it at the state? Did you have a chaplain that came in? Okay, and he just prayed, said a general prayer?
It would rotate a little bit. We would have a chaplain for a certain period of time, and that chaplain, of course, was well aware of what some of the possible liability issues might be and was able to do so in that way. So, for instance, we had a Catholic there. He did not particularly espouse Catholicism, and I use that example because I'm Catholic, so I'm not dissing the Catholic Church. But the thing is, that individual understood that the prayer had to have an all-inclusive quality and could not be a specifically Catholic prayer.
Right. It's not going to be like the Catholic says in Latin says some kind of a prayer. I think what Jay's looking at, what I'd like to see, just a general prayer, to kind of bless the group, because God knows we need blessing. But I think that's about the extent of it. I wasn't looking for, something in-depth, or like it has to be Mormon, it has to be Catholic, it has to be Baptist. Just a general nice prayer, and that's it. I just, like they say before a rodeo, it's just in general. So, yeah.
Sometimes our services, the priest will say, "Hey, I got you out of here before time." So brevity is not only the soul of wit, but perhaps an attribute in other ways. I think Commissioner Carpenter makes awfully good points that it is something that we need to be thoughtful of, and I think his thoughts on this are certainly ones to be taken into account. Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, I like some of the ideas that were thrown out. I like the idea of having other clergy come in, volunteer to come in, maybe put something out countywide to the clergy that are interested. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Plenty of places already do this. And by the way, I did disagree with my colleague, Dan. I think you're more than qualified to say a prayer. I think anybody's qualified to say a prayer. If you want to talk to God, you go ahead and do it. But yeah, I would like to bring that back. I don't, and I totally appreciate what Commissioner Carpenter is saying about not having religion in government, and we just agree to disagree on that. I think religion has been part of our government from the foundation, a big part of our government from the very foundation. And sometimes we struggle with that in today's society, but I don't want to lose that. I think it's too important. I think, quite frankly, we got here because of God, and if we think we can do it without Him, we're in trouble. And I'd prefer just a time to just stop and recognize God. And thank you, and please be with us, kind of a thing. And if we can find some clergy that can come in and volunteer to do that, and it would be interested in doing that, I would love to see that. And that's where I'd like to go with it. But I don't know how that process starts or how we get that moving.
We might just kind of go through this a little bit more. like I say, happily, because we are a 7-member group, you can be interacting with all of us, and maybe we can come up with some kind of a solution that would be, or a way forward that would be acceptable to everybody. So I think, taking all the opinions into account is certainly a good start, and it's a subject that obviously has been settled a couple of different ways throughout the history of the county. So taking up this issue is not exactly unusual. Yes, sir.
And just one more comment, just to make clear, and I think the county councilor had alluded to this, but the Supreme Court has to decide on this. It is legal for government to say a prayer, but there's some guidelines that they put into that ruling. But it certainly is legal, and that's why it's still happening, so.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. I mean, as many of you know, I'm involved with the City of Liberty. We've always done invocation, and we rotated among the council members, and every 8th meeting, it's me. And so I do actually kind of a similar one every time, because I think it's fair. But the Supreme Court has, in a 5-4 decision in the Galloway versus City of Greece case, ruled on this. But in that case, the city had multiple versions, I think, non-Christian, Christian, other types of prayers, and that was probably a big part of why it was permitted. Whereas if every single time it was a clearly Christian prayer, that might draw the foul. And so that's something that we want to just be aware of. There are no super clear guidelines on this, and unfortunately that's the case. So that there's no, like, if you have 20 prayers a year and 17 are Christian, is that okay? But but 15 is not. Whatever that. That's the problem we get into, is where's that line? Of course, my job is to hopefully keep us away from the line, and as prayers that reflect the diversity of our community are great, and the beliefs of our community are great. We just want to be aware of that. But yeah, like I said, I've been at the City of Liberty for 10 years. We've done it all the time, and I say almost every time it's my turn, I say the same one.
If there are no further discussion, do you have any summation you'd like to do, Commissioner? Very well. That concludes the discussion on the invocation on meeting agendas. That brings us to our next and last discussion item, dealing with 2022 Ordinance 40. Administrator?
Thank you. Yes. So the last item for discussion is 2022 Ordinance 40. This has been requested by Commissioner Withington. And just a little bit of clarification on this particular ordinance. This was passed by the commission, I want to say in the 4th quarter of last year, in working with the auditor's office. Typically, when the budget is adopted, there have historically been 2 ordinances for the budget, not counting the prosecutor's ordinances. And so this particular ordinance that's before you is pretty the standard, rubber meets the road, how do you typically process the budget? And so in discussions, we said, why do we do that every year, as opposed to why don't we do an ordinance and put it in the code book, so it's where we all know where it is, and that's where it goes. And so that's what's reflective in this ordinance. However, there were some changes in the ordinance from the prior one, and I think those are a couple of things that Commissioner Withington would like to discuss, to possibly putting back some of the prior information about an amendment to the budget and the transfer of funds.
Very well. With that, we will open the discussion with Commissioner Withington. I would make one point as we do this discussion. If a commissioner wishes to discuss a particular passage, please make reference of it by page number and possibly by sub-letters so that we can follow more easily. With that said, Commissioner Withington, you have the floor.
Okay, so January 5th, 2022, the commission passed 2022 Ordinance 2, section, in there, section D3 said the total amount of adjustments, transfers, and revisions does not exceed the sum of $6,000 in a 90-day period. And then it also talks about transfers not to exceed $3,000 for personnel. So for 2022 Ordinance 40, that was removed. So now it can be, my understanding is transfers can be done without the commission's approval. I would like to see that restored so the commission has visibility before the revisions or transfers are completed, not after. The budget's our biggest public policy decision that we're going to make every year. And I just want to make sure that nothing that we as a commission put into the budget get underfunded or no longer funded because somebody has transferred that money. I understand that it's supposed to stay within the transfers and revisions are supposed to stay within the same fund. But if you look at the general fund, I mean, that has a ton of different purposes that aren't even closely related. So basically, I just want to see the commission take back that responsibility to where revisions, transfers are brought to us beforehand, just to ensure that items that we want aren't underfunded or no longer funded. So, and with that, I'd like to just see what you guys think, or.
Could I kind of get a little bit more of a feel? I'd like to inquire of you. Would you go back to the same dollar amount? Would you do a different dollar amount? How would you see that kind of going forward?
Yeah, so there was some changes in the legislature that changed those figures to 12,000 and 6,000. And so I would like to see it move to 12,000 and 6,000.
Okay, so you would like to see it, your thought is that it would be more appropriate to put it in line with existing state statutes?
Correct.
Or at least mirroring that, even if we're not limited by it, using that as our.
Correct,
as
yes.
our rule of thumb?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where I'm at.
Commissioner Lawson, I think you look like you would like to say something?
Well, no, I was just thinking, that's a great idea. Very good. The big thing is, like he says, this budget, we passed this thing, and it is, it's probably the biggest thing we do, and it's probably the most scrutinized thing that we do by the public. You know, in the past, we know there's been a lot of misspending and things of that nature, things under the table. We've been so great about our transparency, I feel. And so consequently, I think that that is something. We need to keep our finger on that budget. If we've approved it, and it's going to be on our back if things don't go properly, that we should take a more active role in how things are transferred, that the budget stays as we approved it. Of course, there's going to be things that we're going to need to change, but we'd like to be included in those changes and take more of an active role. Something I said a long time ago to Diana and you both in my office one day, I felt as though I got this job and then I didn't get to do anything. Everything was done. So many duties were taken away from the commission. I understand it's by our wonderful Constitution and we have to watch that, but I think it is on the commission's back to be more watchful about everything in that budget. And I don't see that there's a problem with this. I applaud you for doing it. I think that's a good idea, and I would firmly support it.
Commissioner, just another point I'd like you to address, and that is another issue of concern on your part, that it is, we are notified after the fact, and you would prefer whatever practical advance notice is available.
Well, yeah, I would like to be notified before, but there's nothing stopping, even if they notify us before, there's nothing stopping the transfer from happening. I mean, we could still say that we don't want it to happen, but it still could happen without our approval. So I would like us to be able to have more of a say before the transfer's done, and then maybe we can, if we don't approve of it, we can stop it from happening. I just want to make sure that what priorities that we set are funded, and we don't have to worry about them not being funded or money moved to something else.
Something I think we should probably also take in consideration as we go down this particular path, should we decide to do so, and that is that particularly at the end of the year, there is a requirement to transfer funds because we start, there may be more money spent. The sheriff may spend more money on fuel because of gas prices or some other circumstance beyond his control. So there's a necessity. So I guess what I would say is, while I think that is that accountability is important. I think it's important also that we offset that to balance off that consideration. Where that balance is a little bit of what this discussion's about, I think. Anybody else wishing to? Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you. I don't know if I have a suggestion as far as direction, but just only to point out that, especially with government of any type, it's hard to anticipate all contingencies, right? And so we set a budget, yes, but there's the spending part and there's the revenue part. And we have some control over revenue, but if the world tanks, then that comes down and affects us as well. And then you're doing a lot of transfers at that point to deal with that. And so I think what, I guess where I go to is, on the one hand, we have a constitution that sets out the job of the administrator and their responsibilities, what they're supposed to do, sets out our responsibilities. I get a little nervous when we try to do a little too much because life goes on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And there certainly has to be some ability for administration to do its job during that time. And so I tend to start to go to, well, what are those areas of interest that we have interest in finding out more about? And I know you've already spoken to amounts based on what state statute talks about, and maybe those are the right limits, maybe there are others. I do understand the issue of transparency, especially for Clay County, right? But I also have a certain desire to make sure that we are being transparent, but still nimble to do the things that we need to do when they need to be done. Those are my 2 cents. Don't know if I have a direction, but that's at least how I look at it. So, thank you.
You're welcome. The thing is, I mean, I've seen this where it's been done appropriately, and I am, at this moment, I am not displeased at all with the way those are being handled. Under previous years, there's been things that I substantially disagreed with in the way those transfers were handled. I think when we approach this, I think what we need to do is it's certainly a worthy conversation, but we need to make sure that we are finding that balance between, being good watchdogs of the people's funds, but also making sure that the administrative staff has the ability to be able to react to situations and to be able to take care of those, and not just problems with revenues possibly coming in, but quite frankly, emergencies, things that might come out of the blue that affect things. So. I think this is something that we can certainly come up with some kind of an accommodation on, and it's important. What's important to me about this issue is not just the bare facts of the issue itself, but it is to, I think this is a good opportunity for us working as a commission with our administrative staff and starting to establish an even better relationship between those. So I would be interested in, as we go forward with the discussion, making sure that we fully appreciate the flexibility that it is required by a staff to be able to function in a professional way, in a way that, quite frankly, I think we all are looking for the commission, or excuse me, the county government to function. So good discussion to have. I think we need to approach it with, a good bit of feedback from all sources on that. Anybody from this side of the table care to comment or to join the discussion? Okay. I think maybe that is something, once again, it's a little like the last issue. I think this is an issue now that has come up and we've had some discussion. I think it's probably a good issue for yourself being the person who instigated the discussion, as well as others, to start kind of getting together and coming out, kind of coalescing around some kind of a consensus of what is the best way forward with obviously the consultation of staff and with their, so that we can fully appreciate that. I've only been an elected guy. I've never been an administrator. Nobody has willing to trust me with that much influence, so or money for that matter. So I have a great deal of respect for our staff as we have them right now. This is a professional staff, and I've got a great deal of respect for them. But I understand that we need to make sure that we are working as a unit, and I think this might be a good opportunity to expand that team spirit that I think is necessary for a government to have. Further discussion? Didn't mean to pontificate. I guess that's not quite an invocation, but there we go. Commissioner, this is your subject, so if you'd like to kind of sum up or give us whatever other thoughts you'd like to share, please do. Very well. That will conclude our discussion item on 2022 Ordinance 40. That brings us to County Administrator comments.
Thank you. Just a couple of items. Number one is the commission's next meeting will be March 8th at 6 p.m. here in the chambers. And the other item is to make the commission aware of next Tuesday, weather permitting, is the statewide tornado practice and drill. And so just as an information for the commission, the county staff will be participating in that statewide exercise, not only within our buildings, but also in discussions with our staff that work out in the field, just as a refresher of what do we do should an incident occur.
Very good. Thank you. That brings us to Commissioner comments. Let's go around the room. Commissioner Johnson.
Yes, so here we are, March 1st. February just went by, and I don't think we got a chance to stop for a second and recognize and congratulate our county administrator for making it her first year. Anniversary was in February. So congratulations to her on that. I just want to commend you for what you've done. You came in and some interesting things are going on with this change in commission and all that's going on. And if you've talked with our county administrator at all, you'll hear her mention the word our brand, or branding, about our brand. That's two words, our brand. But talk about our brand, which I think is really important. Over the last couple of years, I think we've been rebranding the county in a very positive way, and I'm very excited about that. And I like to hear when Diana talks about our brand and rebranding this county and really becoming the county that we all want to be, and being able to change from those things in the past that we didn't want to be. So, anyways, I want to congratulate her on her first year on the books here, and that's a big one. I mentioned before I have just a small taste of what she did at the city level as a city manager, and I know it's not an easy job, and there's a lot of things to juggle at once. So, anyways, congratulations to you for your first year.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Commissioner. So this week I want to thank our highway department because there's one guy who takes my phone calls, my texts, and my emails, and he never gives me a hard time about it. And I just think I want to give him a good shout out this week because I feel like I've been blowing his phone up a lot lately, including during this meeting. So I want to thank Carl and all the working men and women out of our highway departments who help keep us safe and our roads good. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Carpenter.
No comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Wagner.
I just want to say I enjoyed this meeting today. And the tenor, the fact that clearly we didn't agree on everything, but it was a great conversation, a lot of points that were out there and things to go from on those issues. So thank you. It was a great team day.
Commissioner Wilson.
I don't know how to follow that.
You can do this.
So Diana, congratulations on a year. I know it's been quite challenging working with 7 people versus 3, but you seem to handle it well. I never ask that you don't do, so thank you very much. 2 things. I would like for our administrator to set up a time to tour the airport whenever it's convenient for whoever wants to go. I'd like to have a true professional tour with people that know what's happening out there and get a chance to look at it. It's such a great asset, and I just want to make sure that we're all familiar with it and look at what the plans are going to be for the future with it. That's one thing. The other thing is that I got a call the other day from NNI, your favorite place, and they had advised that they had never received their contract yet. So I called Clay County EDC, nor had they. So I just wondered, is there a reason we haven't sent those out yet? I thought we were going to send them a contract and kind of monitor in that contract that they're more accountable to us, and so that we could proceed. We put them in the budget, and I'd like to see them get their money. But I also want to make sure they're committing to us for some kind of a feedback. Well, so those are the only things I have, but thank you.
Commissioner Withington. I would just echo the comments of most of the comments I've heard here, and that is that we are, I think, coming up with a really collegiate attitude up here. We're really working together, in spite of the fact that there may be some disagreements. I certainly would identify myself with Commissioner Wagner's comments. And apart from all the other obvious benefits, I think that puts Clay County, it puts us in a position to where we can start exerting a little bit more leadership in the Northland and in the area. I think the amount of influence and the amount of leadership that we can express is appropriate given our size and given our growth patterns. I look forward to this commission going forward and enhancing our profile and taking the leadership role that I think Clay County is appropriate for us. So thank you so much for what everybody has been doing, and not just the commission, but obviously staff. We are really building a team here, I think, that is going to allow us to take our appropriate place in the community. With that, that brings us to reports. I believe we have two, Administrator.
We do. Thank you, Commissioners, and thank you for the kind comments. It's been a great year, and I'm certainly very honored and privileged to be here and working with all of you and the team. And that leads me to the first report, which is the 2022 Annual Performance Report. So I think it's the first one that we've ever done that is really just kind of focused on accomplishments that is accomplished by all the departments and all the office holders throughout the year. And this certainly is not a comprehensive list by any means, but it's certainly some of the key things that we wanted to share in an infographic, and we'll be putting that out on the website for the public to take a look at. So great accomplishments by the team. The second report is a preliminary report on the collector's annual settlement. This is a requirement under state statute that the collector is required to present to the commission at the first meeting in March the report on the annual settlement for taxes. And so we call this a preliminary one because technically the collector does not close their year, their books, until the end of February 28th. So the numbers that are in the preliminary report, I believe, were as of the 20th of February. And so at the March 15th meeting, we will submit to you the final report that will include any of those transactions from February 20th through February 28th. And certainly if you have any questions, our Collector O'Reilly is here to happy to answer any questions on the report.
Very well. Everybody has, of course, got them in their packets, so those reports are in your possession. That brings us to recess and adjournment. We are adjourned.